Welcome back to the Brian and Brenden Talking Beaver Football Podcast. Second episode. Man, time really does fly.
Yes, it does. Absolutely. It's good to be back, though.
It is. You know, we had a little bit of a hiatus, people out of town, whatnot. We didn't get to talk about the Minnesota game, but since it's already passed for so long, we're going to do something a little different today, Brenden.
Yeah, I'm excited, Brian.
Yeah. So one of the things we like to do on the Brenden and Brenden Talking About Beaver Football Podcast is not only just talk about what's happening with the team right now and, news and stuff. We like to talk about a broad spectrum of Oregon State topics. And one of the things we're going to do today is we're going to dive into some of the big what ifs in Oregon State football history.
Woo.
Now, you and I are both young. You're younger than me, so we're going to keep this, from the turn of the century, so from 2000 on. So I'm sorry for all the giant killers from the 60s.
The Alex Crawfords of the world.
Yeah, sorry to all those people. But we're gonna keep this. We're gonna try to keep it a little bit more recent. So
speaking of which, did you see that film, Alex Crawford, The Legend of the Giant Killers?
I did see it. Yeah,
yeah, it was good, wasn't it?
I enjoyed it.
But I guess we can't talk 67 Great Pumpkin, as Steve Clark referenced this morning as well.
Yeah,
kind of funny. But anyway, Brian, would you like to start off this lovely little endeavor? Would you like me to start?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, we're just to reiterate, we're gonna go through our top 5 what ifs in Oregon State football since 2000. So, things, you look back on and you're just like, man, if this was different, maybe a different result would have happened. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to start with a little audible mentions just before we dive into our top 5. So Brenden, how about you start us off?
So an honorable mention for me is, what if Ryan Gunderson lived up to the hype?
Ryan Gunderson. That's a decent one. Yeah,
he was a 4-star prospect and the number 1 prospect coming out of Oregon, and was the 16th best quarterback coming in that class, and was supposed to be kind of Derek Anderson's replacement. Derek Anderson was a big-armed 4-star guy coming out of Scappoose High, Brian. Oregon guy, did great things, and they thought this was kind of the next him.
Yeah.
Didn't pan out.
I'm going to blame that on playing for Central Catholic. Rindall's kind of changed a little bit, but
Mr.
still,
David Douglas. But anyway, point being, I think if he had panned out, Oregon State, that 04 or that 05 season really, struggled. Obviously, if Ryan Gunderson didn't, if they didn't, let me rephrase that. They found Matt Moore, so it wasn't ended up being terrible for Oregon State. But it'd been interesting to see if he had kind of evolved into that 4-year guy Riley thought he would be when he got recruited. He was real high on him when Gunderson arrived.
Yeah, absolutely. My first one is, or my first honorable mention, we'll keep these ones nice and short. What if Oregon State didn't upset USC in 06 and 08? Would that have changed the perception of Mike Riley at Oregon State? Would they have been so eager to, sign him to that, contract where, winning seasons, rolled over, got him an extra year onto his contract?
I'm going to say no, and I'm going to say that I think the 06 win was a real turn of the program. I'm not saying the 08 win wasn't important, but that 06 one for me seems bigger, even though USA was number 1, because that was the year coming off, Leinart and Bush, and that was the team that hadn't lost a Pac-12 game. That was their first loss since Texas. Mm-hmm. And that was when USC football, with the exception of that, it really kind of started their downward trend. It was after that, they say that Texas game changed that program.
Yeah. And
it did. And I think that game was huge for Oregon State. Oregon State went on to compete. I'm not saying 08 wasn't important, but, man, if that hadn't happened.
Yeah. What I'm just saying is I think those wins, especially those upsets where you're taking down top 5 programs, and in 2008, the number 1 team in the country, I think that kind of helped solidify the contract that, was kind of an unpopular contract amongst Beaver fans.
I tell you what, though, you can say what you want, but I don't think I've ever been on a bigger kind of emotional high for Oregon State than when I remember being like, what would I have been, 12 or 13, and my buddy and I, who's actually plays at Portland State now, was as a linebacker, we were coming out of the game. It was halftime. We were up 21-0, and I don't think I've ever felt that elated in my life. We're just like, we're going to beat the number 1 team in the country. We're going to beat the number 1 team in the country.
Yeah.
It's to the highest of highs. I have not had anything close to that since.
Yeah, that was definitely a fun game, and so that's a big one.
Do you remember your memories from that game at all?
Oh, yeah. Well, I actually couldn't watch it. I had I was at football, and so
It was a Thursday night game.
It was a Thursday night game.
I remember. Yeah.
I was originally gonna go to that game, but I had other commitments.
Yeah, I remember the only reason I was able to go because it was a late Thursday. It was like a 7:30 Thursday night game. Student teacher conferences Thursday, Friday. Had my conference at like 9 a.m. that morning.
Nice.
Didn't have class. Luckily, Dad was nice enough to take me. But yeah, I mean, just think of what if that hadn't happened. Who knows if Riley would have, been there till 4. I mean, you never know.
Yeah.
Because those really springboarded those Rose Bowl seasons in 08 and 09. What if it hadn't happened?
All right.
Good honorable mention. You win that one,
Yeah,
Brad.
do you have another honorable mention, or you?
I didn't have another honorable mention I had on here, but I did kind of think of one. And that next honorable mention was, what if Oregon State beat Texas, not Alamo Bowl?
No, that's a good one. I actually have that one in later, so we can talk a little bit more unless you have something you want to say.
Yeah, that would have been 10 wins. Mm-hmm. And the different people may not think it's a big difference, but the difference between 9 and 10, double-digit wins, is a really big difference, especially a game Oregon State should have won. And that was a game where arguably, if Cody Vaz had won, Sean Mannion may not have played that next season, and may not have started. So what if that happened, and what if Sean Mannion didn't have that record-breaking year, and Oregon State won 10 games, and maybe they're looked at like probably would have finished in the top 15 in the country, maybe even top 10 if they win that game. And wow, you're looking real good heading the Eastern Washington game the next year. So that was my only other honorable mention.
So my final one is, what if James Rogers never got hurt against Arizona? I believe it was 2010.
Didn't Jaquiz get hurt too?
That was 08. But in 2009,
when he tore his ACL. Oh,
yeah. Because if you look at that season, Oregon State, they were 3-2 after that game. Their 2 losses were.
But they still won that game too, and that was a number 10 Arizona team.
Yeah. So they lost to Boise State and TCU, kind of, within like 2 scores, I believe. Yeah, and I think he would have, because he was coming off a career or season in 08 or 2009 where he set the record for receptions in a season. So he was already, a big time player. He wasn't like a potential breakout. He had his breakout. I think he could have been.
As a freshman, arguably.
That was his sophomore year that he set the. No, it was his junior year that he set the record.
But even as a freshman, that dude was crazy on fly sweeps. 08, he was a big part of that US. I mean, when he was there, he was solid every year.
But 2009 was 91 catches.
Yeah, no, of course.
Yeah.
But I mean, Rogers definitely was. He wasn't like an unknown commodity at all.
Yeah.
And you look back at that, and that was that was Jaquiz's last year. That was that year where the Beavers arguably, Brian, could have, because they had to go 5-7. They could have went like 9-4 really easily.
Yeah.
Like that team lost to Washington State at home. That team lost to. They lost a couple. They lost to Stanford 45-0 or something that year. They lost a couple. They lost to Oregon. That was a tough one. They lost a couple teams they totally should have beat. And I just think once they lost James Rogers, they lost a lot of their receiving in that 2010 core.
No, yeah, definitely. They were. Where is it? Yeah, they were 3-2 with him. They finished 2-5 without him. Yep. 3 of those losses were less than 17 points. You got to think that having him on the field,
absolutely,
maybe sways some things. And instead of going 5-7,
7-5,
7-5,
8-4.
Maybe Ryan Katz gets another go around. In 2011.
Ryan Katz in that year, I thought he played very well. Yeah. All considering he was a sophomore when he came in, he had big shoes to fill for the Canfield Moivau squad. But I thought he did quite well. It was like, okay, this guy could work. Obviously, we didn't know Sean Mannion was sitting on the bench, but who would end up being the Pac-12 career leader in yards. But you never know how it would have shaken out. So those are my 2 honorables.
All right, give me your number 5. Number 5, what if? We'll get into the.
Oh, I didn't have them in order. Now I got to put them in order. Okay. I'll go with number 5. I'll go with what if Oregon State hadn't lost to Washington in 2012.
Okay.
And I'm going to say that because Oregon State was number 7 or 8 heading into that game. John Canzano still thinks he cursed the Beavers by writing that column that said Washington didn't deserve to be in the same field and put it up in the locker room for Washington and stuff. But Oregon State almost came back in that game. Sean Mannion clearly should not have played in that game. Still was hurt from that torn meniscus injury. Cody Vaz comes in and almost wins the game when Oregon State had a terrible. If Cody Vaz started that game, the Beavers would have won. That's my opinion.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point. Obviously, that would have put them. They would have still remained undefeated and whatnot, and that actually ties into my number 5. I'm just going with the Sean Mannion saga because there was a lot of what ifs with him, and I'll start with one of my Sean Mannion what ifs.
So this is your number 5, or you have many like many caveats of 5?
I think I have 3 caveats.
Oh God, here we go. All right.
So first off, what if he isn't rushed? What if he wasn't rushed back? The team, like we said, would still be undefeated.
And the thing about
win over Washington, that would have put them to 8 wins. I think they would have been 8-0. That's something they'd never done in program.
I think was it 8-0 or 7-0? I thought it was 7-0.
It might have been 7. Now that I think about it,
I think they beat Utah the week before, and there was like, okay, we're 6-0 and that was like, whoa.
Yeah.
And then it's funny because Cody Vaz played so well in the BYU and Utah game. You wondered why they wanted to rush him back so much. Because clearly, even though Sean came out and said afterwards, I couldn't plant on my right leg. He said that. I mean, they said he wasn't 100%. So why do you think that they ran him back like that so quickly?
Well, I think he's better than Cody Vaz.
Of course, but a healthy Cody Vaz or an injured Sean Mannion?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, if they hadn't rushed him back, give him like, all right, we have a good thing going with Cody. There's no need to rush back. I mean, just get through that Washington win, just through that Washington game since was such a big one. I think they had a pretty easier schedule after that.
They played Arizona State. They played Arizona State, Stanford,
Cal,
and Oregon.
Yeah.
So I mean,
yeah. So my second one is, what if Sean doesn't get hurt in 2012?
Yeah, I mean, you never know. I mean, obviously Mannion got hurt in that Washington State game when it was a terror, just like when he planted to hand the ball off to Storm Woods or Teron Ward. I think it just tore his meniscus and played through it the Washington State game. And I remember exactly what I was doing when that happened. And I was doing something, and my mom came in. And she's like, "Oh my gosh, Sean Mannion, he tore his meniscus." I'm like, "What?" And then he's like out indefinitely, and I was like, I thought the world was going to end because at the time the Beavers were 4-0. Looking good. I mean, a win over a top 10 Wisconsin squad, beat a tough UCLA team. I forget, Washington State, I think there's one.
No, it was Arizona, where he was just awesome in the
Arizona
fourth quarter.
and UCLA. Yep.
Led that fourth quarter drive.
Yep, and I was like, whew. And then obviously Cody, who hadn't played, but yeah, that's a great one, Brian.
And then my final one, I'm going to swing it back to the Texas. So my final Sean Mannion one is, what if he starts the Alamo Bowl? I mean, Mannion, I think his best is better than Cody Vaz's best. I think Riley kind of got caught up in the moment. Sean didn't have a great Civil War. He had those, late picks in the second half, as the game kind of got away and they had to start.
Cody was the upperclassman at the time.
Yeah.
Riley really values upperclassmen.
Yeah, I just think that.
I think a lot went into that. I think it was because that year the team, I remember people saying the locker room wasn't really divided, but there were guys that wanted to play for Cody and guys that wanted to play for Sean. And I think Cody kind of led with a bigger voice and kind of a swagger at the time. Sean wasn't real vocal yet. He was voted captain as a sophomore year, and I understand that, but Sean didn't really become a real vocal leader until his junior or even senior year. I think Cody kind of led with a more swaggering presence. I know how much you hate that word, Brian, but I think up until that Alamo Bowl, like when Cody came in and beat BYU, it was like he just had this I'm untouchable Lyle Moivau kind of, just gusto to him. I think that's what Riley was hoping. And up until the second half, when Oregon State kind of changed their play calling, they had Texas on the ropes with Cody Vaz.
Yeah, but Cody did not play very well that game. Didn't have any touchdown passes, was sacked. Gosh, somewhere like at least 6 times. Like he
Okafor had like 5, has a sack record. I think it's 7 or 8 times.
Yeah, just wasn't nearly as good as Sean can be. And I think at that point Sean was healthy. I think
because they played them both in the Nicholls State game too.
Yeah, I mean Sean got the start and Sean looked fine. And I mean for the in the first half Sean looked really good against Oregon. He was really good against an albeit pretty bad Cal team, but. I think if they go Mannion, I think they win that game. Then we get to that 10 wins.
I remember that Cal game being so torrential downpour. And the only thing I remember about that Cal game is Brandon Cooks coming back to make that catch. And right before the catch was even made, the crowd erupted because Stanford had kicked the field goal to beat Oregon.
Oh, yeah.
And Riley was like, I don't know why everyone was cheering before he even made the catch. And it's because the student section found out the Ducks had just lost. So that's the only thing I remember out of that game other than being just drenched. But anyway, we better get into the 5. We'll be here for a while, Brian.
Yeah. All right. Number 4, Brenden. Go for it.
Number 4. All right. Here's what I got for my number 4. I think you might like this one, Brian. But it's from the same. It's kind of from that same caveat. What if Oregon State did not lose to Eastern Washington in 2013?
Interesting. Yeah, I think that
Because
they start off in the top 20. They're ranked 25th in the nation.
That was after the Texas loss, so it kind of ties in. If Oregon State does not lose that game, with how the offense, had Richard Mulaney, you had Brandon Cooks, arguably you start off the season 7-0 with the way the Pac-12 shook out and just, there were some, maybe Utah, I mean, you never know, but what if they hadn't lost that game? What if they take care of Eastern Washington like they're supposed to? Oregon State could have gotten real high that year because Mannion was still Mannion. You still had Brandon Cooks, who gave you a chance to win every game. And your defense, maybe if you don't allow 65 points, the defense that brings back everybody from the year before just about, you wouldn't have expected that.
Yeah, I mean, you lose. They lost a lot on the defensive line, especially in the interior. They lost Poyer, who was covered, who could just cover up so many
to see Poyer lose the Alamo Bowl, like that was a hard way to end his career.
Yeah,
but yeah, that's mine there.
Yeah, that was rough because I think that knocked them down significantly, and then they end up playing like really well. They won
six straight,
won 6 straight,
and then lost 5 straight.
Yeah, I think their first loss was to Stanford, and that was just like that could have been a top 10 matchup.
And Oregon State almost won that game too. That was that game we talked about where Dale Catchings Kevin Cummings.
That could be a good one. Like, what if Kevin Cummings catches that ball and they?
Yeah, I mean because I remember everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, Oregon State's defense is bad." Oregon State didn't have a run game that year. It was literally just like Mannion to Cooks.
Yeah.
And Oregon State played so well and almost pulled that out. Remember, Tyler Gaffney fumbled. The Beavers had a shot, just went for that. Couldn't quite finish it off. And then that Stanford game just beat them up for the rest of the year. And they, obviously that year ended up pretty cool with, losing to Oregon in that dramatic, just back and forth, just awesome game. And you could see the Beavers could hang with most everybody that year. So I thought it'd be interesting to see if they hadn't lost.
Yeah. And I mean, they could have been a completely different team just in terms of confidence, starting 2 years off, 6-0. And
that could have completely changed Riley's perspective. I mean, you never know. So anyway, yep.
All right. My second one, what if Dennis Erickson never left or stayed maybe 5 years longer?
Why do you have to take one that I had in my top 3? Ouch. Okay, I'm going to reserve judgment because I'm going to come back to that for mine. But I'm going to say that's a really good choice. So
yeah, he wins 6. He goes 7-5 his first year. Breaks that.
After 28 years, the Beavers are winners.
Yeah.
Daryl Lonnie.
I heard somewhere on 1080 The Fan that 28 years isn't a very long time.
Woo!
But
I need some aloe for that burn.
He goes 75. He goes 7-5. Obviously goes to the Fiesta Bowl. Could have been, one of the
arguably only had one bad year against in 01.
Yeah, and then went 5-6, then 8-5, and then immediately after Riley wins 8 games. He wins 7 games. So he wins 15 games in 2 years. So you got to think that with Erickson there, he was really good at getting the JC guys to come in and make immediate impacts. Could he have established something at Oregon State? I think he said leaving Oregon State when he did was probably one of the worst career moves.
He said it's the biggest mistake of his life to this day.
Yeah, so when you do something like that, you kind of have to look back like, man, what could have been, because he was still in the prime of. He was still like I would say in the prime of his coaching. He had won two national titles at Miami. He obviously took Oregon State to the
turned
Fiesta
Washington
Bowl.
State around too when he was there, and then
yeah. But it's not really Erickson's MO to stick around. He's a traveling coach, as I would say.
Yeah. So like I said, I'm gonna hold judgment because that's in like my top 2 maybe. So I'll hold back, but that's a good point.
Yeah, and then also like in that Fiesta Bowl year, here's a sub one. Like, what if they beat Washington, and they make that end of the game field goal, go on to win that game? Are we talking about Oregon State with a national championship?
Maybe. Are you talking like Ken Simons and saying if the playoff was in that system back then, Oregon State wouldn't have. Ken Simons like we wouldn't have lost again that season.
Of course, Ken Simonton's going to say that.
I agree. That team at the end of the year was almost unbeatable with the way they were playing on offense, playing on defense.
I think Miami would have beat them.
I don't know. That would be kind of cool though. Erickson versus Miami.
Yeah.
But anyway.
So anyway, that's my number 4. What's your number 3?
What if Oregon State beat Oregon in 08 and 09?
The Civil War years.
And what if they had gone to the Rose Bowl 2 straight years? And the 09 was the War for the Roses. What if the Beavers followed through on their destiny and went to the Rose Bowl in 08 and then went to the Rose Bowl in 09? And both, if Oregon State hadn't got blown out in 08 when that year they beat USC, or 09 when they had it in their grasp, what if they beat them both years, Brian? I mean, I think that would have been, springboards for recruiting, springboards for success, and we wouldn't be talking about a team rebuilding right now.
Yeah, no, Rose Bowls they are hard to come by, especially when you're in a conference with USC, who just
dominated all of them.
Like the Rose Bowl, I mean, it's the granddaddy of all for a reason. I mean, even if they just get to one of them, that would have been just so huge for the program. And
they had it back-to-back years, but just couldn't quite get over the Ducks.
Yeah, no, and I agree. And that's one of my... It ties into, I guess, one of the points, one of the big what ifs. What if Quiz was able to play in that 08 one?
Is that your next one?
Yeah.
I'm going to say I think that would have completely changed the dynamic because Jaquiz Ross, I mean, I can't remember who Oregon State played, whether it was Ryan McCants or whoever.
Yeah, it was like, I believe his last name was Francis. But yeah, you lose Quiz, who was the freshman of the year in the Pac-12. He was the offensive player of the year.
Yeah, Jaquiz Rogers was just head and shoulders above any other running back the Beavers had on that roster. Yeah. And it wasn't even close. The Duck defense wasn't, I mean, the Beavers still put up 35 points. Moival threw for 400. I mean, it wasn't great, but Oregon State's defense was the problem that game. They allowed 62 or 65 points.
Yeah, but having a run game with someone completely changes that dynamic. The game plan, for one thing, the game plan changes when you have Jaquiz Rogers, who was averaging, he probably had like 25 carries a game that year.
Or more, probably sometimes 30 touches, really.
Yeah, he was touching the ball a lot. That, when you lose like that chunk of your offense.
And then James Rogers gets hurt halfway through, breaks his collarbone in that game too.
Yeah, you have to completely change things. Like Loyal Moival threw 51 times that game.
Yeah.
That's 20 more than his highest, than the second highest game he had that year.
Because the Beavers were playing from behind. They had no other choice.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. You have to change your game plan. All of a sudden, you're forced to do things that you're not as strong as. Which with Quiz, you could have controlled the clock.
Yeah,
kept the defense up. Because Oregon's defense wasn't that good.
No, that Oregon State team in 08 was one of the more complete Oregon State teams ever.
Yeah.
And, if you would have had Quiz at a ground game, you probably would have won that game.
Yeah, it definitely would have been different. I'm not going to say that we would have won that game or that Oregon State would have, but got to wonder, what if?
Yep. All right,
next one, Brenden.
My number 2, it ties into what you just said. What if Oregon State did not recruit James Rogers?
Interesting.
James Rogers was one of the, I remember the story, was one of the, lowest guys, like a 1 or 2 star recruit out of Florida. And I forget what coach ended up going to recruit him, but it was like he found him by accident, almost. Like they were going to see someone else and saw James Rogers, if I remember correctly.
I think you are remembering correctly. Because one, it was Texas, not Florida. And
no, it was I said Texas.
You said Florida.
Oh,
well, whatever.
But anyway, I believe he found him by accident. They went to Texas to go recruit somebody else, and then they
Willie Lyles.
and somebody
Willie Lyles.
And somebody said to one of Oregon State's coaches, I remember someone said, he said, "Oh,
are you here to see Quiz?"
Yeah, and then whoever Oregon State's coach goes, "Who?" I'm here to see James. And they're like, "Oh, you only want James, so you can get Quiz."
Yeah.
And obviously, maybe Riley had that in his back pocket when he started recruiting James, knowing. But even Quiz wasn't exactly like he wasn't a Leonard Fournette or a Royce Freeman. Quiz is always still a 3-star, but still, people knew how special he was going to be. And what if Oregon State?
People in Texas didn't.
Maybe not, but I mean, he was the people that were around knew he was going to be something. And I said, what if Oregon State didn't recruit them? That would have come. I mean, they may be one of the most dynamic players in Oregon State history. And I think, what if you don't recruit them?
No, yeah, that's definitely a good point because, like, they shouldered so much of the load, in those 08, 09, and what would have been 2010 if James hadn't been hurt. So yeah, I agree. I think that those were very important recruits to get, especially getting James. Like how just smart does that work? I don't think he had a single offer coming out of college, and he turns into a starter right away. He didn't like redshirt. He wasn't. He's
fly sweep.
Yeah, he's the fly sweep guy.
Beat the Ducks. Last time Oregon State beat the Ducks, Rogers ran around the ends. That's crazy to think about. Last time we would beat the Ducks, James Rogers was a freshman.
Yeah.
And we had the Lady Bra jerseys.
Yeah.
Those are my favorite jerseys of all time, Brenden. Sports Bros.
Of course they are.
Just kidding.
So I did go out of order just because I liked the quiz point that tied into the what if they had made the Civil War. So
your number 2.
My number 2, which was actually my number 3. What if Cooks, Crichton, and Sayamalu were all available in 2014? What if
Interesting.
What if
Cooks and Crichton did not declare
and if
Isaac was healthy?
Yeah, I think that's a 10-win team.
Brenden Cooks easily influences 3 wins. I was never like, as you look at it, Scott Crichton's stats didn't necessarily blow you away, but his presence on that line, I don't think 10 wins, but Oregon State, that year they lost to Washington State and Cal at home. They lost to
close games.
Yeah, right. And then I'm trying to think who else they lost to that year. That was just a terrible loss. They went 5-7. Those were. I'm gonna look it up real quick because I want to know now.
Yeah, no, I think that's 10-win teams because I think Cooks adds just a whole nother. They lost to Utah in double overtime. I think that's easily a 10-win team. I just think Cooks would have been.
Okay, so they beat Portland State start of the year. Good stuff. Beat Hawaii. Beat San Diego State. Lost to USC down in the Coliseum 35-10. Do you really win that game, I wonder?
No.
Okay.
Maybe. It's definitely closer.
It's interesting. You beat Colorado. You lose to Utah. You lose to Stanford pretty handedly. Lose to Cal. Lose to Washington State. I don't think you get blown out by the Huskies in Chris Peterson's first year.
Yeah, I think.
And I remember that USC game, Oregon State, up until they lost both players that year. They lost Noke Tago and Jalen Grimble, who were never the same players on those chop blocks and were playing very well that game. So I might say the only loss that year, they would have lost to the Ducks. I'm sorry, the Ducks were good. Really, the Ducks and maybe Stanford are the only 2 games where I'm like, wow, he maybe would have lost.
Yeah, I think Cooks would have made that much of a difference. I think
Crichton definitely.
Like baseball, they have like the WAR stat, the wins above replacement.
Yep.
And just think you would have, Cooks and Mulaney. Like Mulaney, he might get hurt, he might not.
Villy still waiting.
Yeah, your starting receivers aren't a sophomore in Victor Bolden and 2 freshmen in Jarman and Villeman, who, I mean they're fine, but
not Cooks.
They're not Cooks. And
that's what I remember you told me. I asked you, and you said, programs like Oregon State aren't good enough to take the blow of a guy leaving early.
And that was one of the points I've written down is that Oregon State, their biggest issue, they usually have good talent.
Yep.
But it's the depth of the talent. Once you start leaving, like taking players away, early.
Medical retirements or anything.
Yeah. That hurts them tremendously.
Yep.
And so when you lose, 3 of your 4 best players, who could be back.
Yep.
You don't really have those guys because even Cooks, like he was really good as a freshman, but he still wasn't the Brenden Cooks we saw even his sophomore.
No, I mean Brenden Cooks, his freshman to sophomore year jump was amazing. I mean, obviously we know why he played, but looking back, Scott Crichton, now a free agent in the NFL. Looking back, did he really need to declare? Probably not. He got drafted in the 5th or 6th round.
Yeah, and one of the best examples that I can think of is in 2007, Oregon State had a really good front seven. Or no, is the 2008 with Slade Norris and
no 07 was that year
when they had
the number 1 defense in the Pac-12, and that was year they beat Cal when they were number 1 in the country. That was the number 1. That was Banker's high as a defense. So yeah, they were the number 1 defense in the pack and like top 5 nationally.
Yeah, they replaced their entire front seven, and they are still very good in 08.
Yeah,
like they're solid. I think 2012. Well, we're getting way off topic, but yeah, I think Oregon State's not a program right now that can take many people leaving early. You need, I think having them on campus as long as they can is good.
Yep.
Like it is kind of good in a sense for like some like Brenden Cooks to go get drafted in the first round.
Yeah, I mean Brenden Cooks.
And I can never.
No, I couldn't. I mean, look at his success.
Yeah, and especially in football where things could just change so quickly. I'm very pro. Like I'm for players getting to the NFL as soon as possible.
Yep, I agree.
But in terms for Oregon State, it's it has a negative effect on the program. Right. Just the fallout of it.
All right, so my number 1, you said it earlier. What if Dennis Erickson didn't leave? I'm big on Dennis Erickson. I loved, looking back and being able to study it because obviously I was 7 when Dennis Erickson left. Being able to go back and study and look at Dennis Erickson and his, everything he got, if he hadn't left, he had one bad year, and that was when Oregon State went 5-6. They lost their whole offensive line and lost, most of those guys in the all Pac-12 offensive line, and then still had Smith and Simonton expected them to go out. Sports Illustrated touted him as preseason number 1. I still have that magazine, and the SI, they were preseason number 1, and they just couldn't do it. They lost too much off that team. But then he turns around, and off that 2000 team, gets arguably the best running back in recent memory, not named Jaquiz Rogers, and Steven Jackson to commit to him on that recruit. Steven Jackson basically committed the Beavers, I'm assuming, because of Dennis Erickson and that.
Well, what's actually pretty funny is, if I'm remembering correctly, a lot of schools wanted Steven Jackson to play linebacker.
Really?
Yeah.
I'd never heard of that.
Yeah, and Oregon State was like one of the lone schools to.
But how could you not look at his physical tool and be like, whoa?
Well, he's built like a linebacker.
Crazy. But anyway.
Yeah. So anyway.
Point being, though, that, he went 8-5 that year in 2002. If Erickson hadn't left, he knew how to build a program. He knew how to get JC guys in. I think Erickson really had a way with the players. He knew how to fundraise. Erickson was so instrumental, they say, in getting that west side or east side of Reeser done. He was like, after the Fiesta Bowl, said, we need to put money to the side for this. He was a lot like Pat Casey, where he could just kind of ask for money and get it really easily, which is something Mike Riley, I don't think, did very well. I think, I think Gary Anderson asked for it a little bit too, in a good way. But Erickson knew he was really great with the donors. He knew how to get money. He had a great personality. There wasn't a whole lot to not like about Dennis Erickson. And obviously, like you said, he said it when he was at Arizona State. Leaving Oregon State was probably the biggest mistake of my life because he went to a terrible situation in San Francisco where there was no cap room. They fired him after like 1 year. Yeah. So, he said that was the biggest mistake of my life. He said, I'd love to still be there. And he probably honestly would be.
Yeah.
Or real close. Maybe he'd retire by now, but real close. He's still coaching at Utah. So,
yeah. What is he like?
Running backs coach, but still. A running backs coach with 2 rings.
Yeah.
That's pretty good company.
All right.
But anyway, that's my top 5.
That's top 5. That's a solid top 5. My final one. What if Mike Riley wasn't so loyal?
Oh, man. Brian, you're reading my mind.
Yeah, it was.
You're the best.
Because here's.
I'll let you go for
it. Like Mark Banker, I think after the 2 Rose Bowl runs, had a couple tough years. He redeemed himself in 2012. That was a good defense. That they had really good players.
Poyer, led that team.
Yeah, but they had
Creighton and Wynn and Doctor
and DJ
Welcher Alexander.
Yeah,
whatever.
Welcher Alexander had to think about which one he's going by these days. Their secondary, like Rashad Reynolds, is really good.
Yep,
that was just a solid defense. But 2013 and 2014, they were bad. Awful. So I think that he could have made a move like, hey, it's not getting done. We have to do this.
You look at a guy like Mark Helfrich, right? And you'd think he'd be super loyal, right? He when Nick Aliotti retired, did the Oregon thing, promoted Don Pelham. Last year, when the Ducks lost, and they lost that game, everyone knew there had to be a change made. And Helfrich did not remove him from staff. He said, okay, you're going to go to linebackers coach. We're going to bring in Brady Hoke. Ed Ray had the conversation with Mike Riley after that 2014 and said, we need to restructure these contracts for your assistants. Not or else, but there was a lot of pressure. And that's what changed everything for Riley. What is that conversation with Bob DeCarlos and Ed Ray where, he had it, it's still not publicized what exactly was said, but Riley said something changed for him after that meeting with them. And many people have said it was renegotiating those contracts for those assistants because Banker was on like a lifetime contract too. And even John Garrett and Danny Langsdorf, before he left, Langsdorf was on kind of hot and cold temperament as well.
Yeah, Langsdorf, Riley had to take play calling duties away from him, so it's just like...
Yep. And then obviously John Garrett was a nightmare, but...
Yeah, it's like, all right, how... There are ways to improve the program, and I think that he does have a loyalty, and I think loyalty is a good virtue to have as
But
a
not
person.
I don't know if it's in college football. Can't be.
I still think it is too, but there's got to be a point where, like, hey,
So if it were you, would you have said so long then at a certain point?
I would have, yeah.
That's a tough decision. I mean, you know, for someone that'd be like, you know, it's almost like not fire or demoting like one of your like Riley and Banker grew up together.
Yeah.
Like firing one of your best friends.
Yeah.
That's hard, and I understand that. I understand, but the correct decision for Oregon State would have been to move on.
Yeah, and I still think you can be loyal, but be like, hey, I have to make these decisions. Like right now, you're just not getting it done. And
could have reassigned him to linebackers.
yeah, there could have been some shuffling around. They could have done what like Anderson did with Baldwin. You know, just demoted him from offense coordinator to.
Yeah, I mean, look at Baldwin. Baldwin is a smart offensive mind. It just didn't work out at Oregon State with the play calling. You look at how much better the play calling was with McGiven. That happens, but obviously someone that has 35 years of coaching experience like Baldwin, you still want to keep on staff. Mm-hmm. So you shuffled a little bit.
Yeah, and so I think like if Mike Riley was, I still think his loyalty is a very good trait, but sometimes, you know, too much of a good thing can be bad.
Yep.
And I think that was the case with him.
All right.
Any more reactions to anything we got?
Yeah, you know, I think it was a lot of things that you and I really kind of brought together, and I think more than anything, it was interesting that you and I had a lot of similar points. You know, we kind of looked and were able to see we both had Erickson, we both had something to do with the Rogers brothers, we both had something to do with that 13 season. So, you know, it's crazy to think there's always those what if moments looking back at back in Oregon State football. So it was a interesting little thing.
No, yeah, that was a lot of fun. Obviously, we missed a ton. Like there can be what ifs in just like about every game.
Let's go back to the OAC, Oregon Agricultural College. What ifs of the OAC?
Yeah, that would have been awesome, but that would take a lot more research than maybe I'm willing to do right now. Maybe someday, but
yeah. Anyway, but yeah, on the Brenden and Brian Talking About Beaver Football podcast.
Yeah, that was
good stuff.
Yeah, good one. We'll be back again.
We'll pick it up with some game day preview next week.
We'll get more into the game day preview. Gosh, these bye weeks, especially this early, it just seems like
they're rough.
Yeah, it's the season like
they're
just
almost
got
draining.
started.
They're draining a little bit.
Yeah, well,
maybe not for us. I'm sure the players that are a little bruised up are like, whew. But for us as fans, you know, just wanting to see more football.
Yeah,
it's okay. We'll get our football fixed.
I mean, you go through the lags, the grind of fall camp, even for reporters. I mean, you get like towards the end of fall camp, it's like, all right, we're just ready for games. We're ready to
absolutely.
To change.
We're tired of writing practice reports on the same thing for a month.
Yeah, and then you get this taste of the game, and you're like, oh, so much is happening, and now you have to wait a whole 16 days to play Idaho State.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, we do get 11 straight games in 11 weeks. So
yep, I like it.
I guess you kind of take what you got. So I think that's all we got here on the Brenden and Brian Talking About Beaver Football podcast. Thank you everyone so much for watching. We'll be back again